Okay, we're ready. Okay, we're ready. Okay, well, we'll open this, this special joint meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. If somebody can think of the flag, if you don't have one. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic
for
for
which it
which it
stands,
stands, one nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and
and
justice
justice
for
for all.
all. And we'll open the meeting with a moment of silence. And this meeting, we'd just like to announce this meeting is being recorded by WHCA, and will be available. It's available live now, and it'll be available tomorrow as a YouTube broadcast. As you all know, and you received the email, the purpose of this meeting is so that all parties, all three boards and their members and administrators can understand the history of the assessment from the school district to the towns over the last number of years, where mistakes have been made, so there's some clarity around that. And then after we discuss that and get clarity, the object is to make sure that we have systems in place so that it doesn't happen again. And because what happened was unfortunate, and it caused each of the towns to see each other with suspicion, and that's not the way the towns have acted in the past, and only recently has it been like that. So our goal is to seek clarity with what happened, to either search out ways or discuss ways in which it won't happen again. And then we also want to make sure that the new regional agreement committee continues on with this work, the work that Chris Scriven has started. So given that, what I'd like, I know that Randy has done a lot of homework on this. He has prepared a kind of a timeline, and I'd like to give him a few minutes to share that with the rest of us all, and then we'll take it from there. You ready, Randy? Randy, you need to unmute if you want to talk.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you said, we were looking for a history of this, which is something that I think lacked as we just went through the last year and some odd months. What I think we got lost in the effect and didn't get a solid explanation of the cause. And that's my goal this evening. So what I've done is I put together a timeline where all the facts are not only verified by email, but by meeting, by public record, and by meeting minutes. I'm going to go through it. I would ask you let me get through it. If you have any questions, please jot them down. But just for the sake of clarity for anybody who might be watching this, I'd like to get through the timeline. So to start, we have to go all the way back to 1993, obviously, the Education Reform Act. We're not going to go into that, but we're going to go into what that did. It obviously, when it came to the assessment issue, puts in place a statute, the statutory method. This was never addressed in any Whitman-Hanson agreement up until this previous year was finally the first year that we've handled it correctly. That being said, the per pupil method, or an alternative method, where some confusion comes was that was almost, I think, a feeling that was an illegal method came about. That absolutely was not an illegal method. But what we clearly did not do was follow the statute. And the statute being that if you were going to use a alternative method, i.e. the per pupil method, that the towns should have known it was being used, and there should have been a vote by the member towns. So why between 1993 and up until this past year we've never used the right statute? I don't know. Some clarity starts coming about 2007. In 2007, Destiny puts out that memo that a lot of us have seen. We treated that as kind of like a holy grail, but truly that 2007 memo was only an affirmation, affirming of their position due to the fact that around that time, some school districts started questioning what had actually been put in place in 1993. Now, I don't think either town, and I couldn't find it, and I believe the school district, we don't know who got that. It's been talked about that this went out to the towns in 2007. I've yet to been able to find any type of proof that who received it and if it got properly relayed. So we have an instance where we don't know exactly how DESE communicated to us. In 2012, the business manager, Christine Suka, what I will say, when in 2012, an erratic fact pattern in the filing of year-end reports starts. I'll get back to those year-end reports as we start to go along. So at this point, nobody from either town through the history of the whole district has once questioned our assessment methodology, to my knowledge. In May 24th, 2016, a Whitman resident, Chris George, sends an email to Ruth Whitner. In this long email, Chris was obviously involved with the SOS project, trying to get an override at the time. He sends a very lengthy email to Superintendent Whitner. He starts with this paragraph. I wanted to pass along a link to the PDF that I spoke to you last night about. You can see the first two paragraphs was what I was mentioning. Below that paragraph is a link titled mass.gov document, technical assistance, best practices, regional assessments.pdf. What that link actually is was a link to the 2007 DESE memo. So we know in 2016, the superintendent of schools was given a link to the 2007 DESE memo. At this time, as also Chris said that, and I believe he's publicly stated it, school committee member Fred Smalls also stated this, that there was some dialogue between those two at that time. Okay, so then we move to the 2017-2018 Regional Amendment Committee. As we were all told, and I pulled this out of meeting minutes, that according to the superintendent, the superintendent contacted the chair of the school committee, feeling that the current document was, as she puts, antiquated. It referred to closed schools and other outdated information. So after that request, we form the 2017 into 2018 Regional Amendment Agreement Committee. And this is where obviously now a lot of our answers can be found and a lot of very deep questions start to come from. So in the very first meeting on September 25th, 2017, Mars representatives, Mac Reed, Steve Henneman, and Steve Donovan come down to Whitman-Hanson. They open with a slide saying the 3 reasons why we need to update the agreement. 1, education reform of 1993 is not addressed in the current agreement. 2, legal and practical issues. 3, an opportunity to update the agreements into one document. That's followed up with a slide that says significant issues, statutory assessment, alternative method. About 20 minutes into the meeting, Steve Donovan stands up and states, currently the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District uses the statutory method, which is the most common method used in the state and is outlined by statute. The only other is the alternative method. An alternative method would need to be, the district would propose a method to DESE. It can be more creative than the statutory method, but both towns would need to vote on it each and every year. We will talk about that the statutory method as we move forward. Obviously, myself, when I watch that, it raises some deep concerns. So on Friday, August 14th, about 10:30 in the morning, I reached out to Mac Reed and had a conversation with him. I repeated the statement that I just read to the people involved in this meeting right now. Then I asked him a specific question. Why would the Mars representatives why were you under the assumption the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District was using the statutory method? Mr. Reed's response, we asked Christine, and that's what she said she used. So the conversation went on. I then said, well, unfortunately, we use a per pupil method. We have never used the statutory method. He said, yeah, no, she was using a formula, but the numbers were wrong. I didn't understand what he was saying. So I said, no, we use a per pupil by enrollment method. No, she was using a formula, but the numbers were wrong. He then said, I am not the numbers guy, but if you would like to speak with Steve Henneman, I can get you two in touch. Excellent. I then went on to ask another question about a subsequent meeting, and I just need to get my notes here. And it was the January 29th meeting. So I said, is this when you discovered that we were not using the statutory meeting? Because this is another comment that I feel needs to be addressed because it causes quite a bit of headache for anybody watching these meetings. Mr. Henneman states, we have to make a little adjustment in our schedule. Steve I and Steve Henneman came down a few weeks ago, met with Ruth and Christine to go over the assessment business. We worked something in, but there are still some things that need to be fixed. We'll give it to you. That was going to be our main issue tonight, was to talk about that. So we're going to have to postpone that till our next meeting, discussing the financial thing, the assessment. So obviously myself, I thought, okay, this is when they find out that we're not using the statutory method. Unfortunately, that was not his answer at this time. It was, no, she was using a method that was not in your agreement. We had to get the method she was using in the agreement. So by my conversations with Mac Reed, there was obviously not a nefarious intention. That it appears that that at this time we have somebody that obviously is employed by the school district that didn't have a full understanding of what she was using. So I didn't know what Mac Reed had meant by using the wrong numbers. So I had spoken to him, like I said, on August 14th, which was a Friday. I slept on it a couple nights and I reached back out to him and I asked him to have Steve Henneman call me. Steve Henneman and I spoke on August 17th, about 1:10 in the afternoon. And we started going over some numbers. And basically, Steve Henneman's statements to me was she was using neither the per pupil method nor the statutory method, that Christine Sukar was using her own hybrid method. And she was starting with the wrong numbers, but she had a basic formula similar to a statutory method. I said, okay, when do we know what she was doing this? Because the towns at no point received any clarity on this, and we're 2 years down the road now. So Steve Henneman says to me, it was in the spring of 2018, before the current administration took over, I received a call from Christine saying to me that the formula which they were given in the RAC meetings does not work. The numbers do not add up. Steve Henneman goes over the numbers with her discovers that what she's doing wrong is not using the minimum local contribution. He explains it to her. She knew she would, if she thought she was using the statutory method correctly, she now knows she's doing it wrong, and she was corrected. Unfortunately, her doing it wrong, we don't see any type of correction. She never goes to her boss that we know of. She never says, I've been doing this wrong. And the school then goes through 2 more budget cycles with her knowing that she's doing it wrong, and it continues. Just to backtrack a little bit, in the January 29th meeting, I know there's also been some confusion. I'd like to clear some things up, that there's, I think there's some people out on a witch hunt trying to get other people involved in this. In that meeting that Steve Henneman and Mac Reed had with Ruth and Christine, I specifically asked who else was in that meeting. And there were only 2 people involved in that meeting. It was Mac Reed, it was Ruth Whitner and Christine Sukow. My next question was, okay, well, when does the current administration, when are they made aware of Christine's mistakes or alleged mistakes? Steve Henneman says to me that himself and the assistant director of Mars came down in June of 2019 and had a meeting with the school committee chair and Superintendent Szymaniak, where a actual pen to paper was put to Christine's numbers, and it was fully discovered what she was doing wrong at that time with the current administration. So that's the end of the Regional Agreement Committee and where it's been up to this point. Backtracking now, prior to what I knew with Steve Henneman and Mac Reed, we go back to March of 2019. Still, this issue is fresh and unknown in a lot of people's minds. I believe it's the first time it was brought out publicly. I bring this out publicly in a selectmen's meeting. I asked school committee member Small and Chairman Hayes at that time about the assessment issue. At that time, Mr. Small responds to me regarding an email that he had sent to Christine at the time, a direct question to Christine in 2019. What method of assessment do we use? Statutory method or an alternative assessment? Her response to him was the alternative method. Obviously, we know where this goes into spring and late summer. The towns start gathering information, Whitman's gathering information, and we have quite a bit of infighting starting to take place. Reportedly, sometime after the June meeting into late summer, this is when the school district begins their investigation, an internal investigation on the former business manager. On September 3rd, a citizen from Whitman, Sean Kane, puts up a post on a Facebook site where he puts up a picture of the year-end reports. This is the first time that we are made, we finally start to see the year-end reports. I have gone back and looked at these year-end reports, and I have them all right here. And unfortunately, in 16, 17, 18, they are completely misfiled using the statutory method. In the previous years, they're very erratic, mischecked boxes. So I think we all know where we sit here. Come September 18th, we finally get a very clear definition of what had happened. Superintendent Szymaniak finally has a school committee meeting, and it is brought to light a little more discussion about assessment methodology, Attorney Bresnahan for the school district comes in on November 15th. November 5th is when Christine Lynch comes in. For myself personally, I felt those conversations focused around legality of the vote and not, I don't feel like we've ever been presented the information that this was actually done wrong. So I guess my question, and this is where I'll ask for a minute of personal leeway, would be to the chair of the school committee. Is it your position, knowing what we know here this evening, that the school assessment issue had followed statute all these years?
Bob, Bob, would you like to unmute and respond to Randy, or?
Randy, go ahead again. I'm sorry, I was trying to unmute.
Well, I guess my question is, is it your opinion that the school assessment issue, although we know legally binding by town vote, had followed statute? And if that answers no, then I guess what are we going to do as partners all chime in to make sure that this doesn't happen again?
You were coming in and out a little bit, but obviously we have a new business manager who's taking a different approach, I believe, on the statutory method and what it is. I think everyone is much more schooled on it now than they were in the past. There were several committees and several different members that, as you said in your statements going back into 2007, that no one knew about it.
No, I never said nobody knew about it. I mean, we now know somebody obviously knew about it. But I'm asking you a pretty general question. That is it your position that the statute was followed properly by the school district? Yes or no? It's a, knowing what we know as we sit here this evening, yes or no?
It depends on the correct information of those statements.
You know,
Because
I think I'm going to interrupt you, Bob.
Go ahead.
Because I'm not sure we're here to ask questions like that, Randy. Did you know? Were we following the right method? Were we not following the right method? Just a second. Just a second.
Based on the law, Kyle, yes or no? Did we follow it?
I'd like to hear from Superintendent Szymaniak now. Jeff, if you've listened to Randy's remarks, do they jive with the way you have seen things? And
Yes.
I think it's obvious to everybody that the system wasn't used correctly. The person that wasn't using the system correctly is no longer with us. I'd like you to give your input into it, Jeff. And I think what we really need to do is to look forward more than look back. And just say what we need is some sort of reassurance that we have systems in place now that can't happen again.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the time to speak to everyone here. It's been a long couple of years trying to work through this process. The timeline that Mr. Lamattina presented is the timeline that I've been able to track back to 2016, back to 93, back to the memo of 207, which seemed to have come out to superintendents, charter school leaders, across the Commonwealth, from what I recall.
But not the towns, if I'm correct, right, Jeff?
I don't believe it went to the towns.
No.
I did, and I don't want to speak of rumor, but I did hear that it went to FinComs across the state around this issue. But I'm not clear on that. But when things come out from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, they're addressed to superintendents and charter school leaders so that they're covered. Business managers might have been on this one, but usually it goes right to the superintendent's office. And at
Right.
that point, it was Dr. John McEwen who was the superintendent.
Exactly.
So the timeline that Randy presented is fairly accurate. I also had some conversations with Steve Hemmon. I had some conversations with Mac Reed. As I took charge in July of 18. My first real conversation around this methodology is when Mr. Small sent the email, and we had a conversation prior to a selectmen's meeting with the email and statutory. I believe that's when we started, my assistant superintendent, myself, started looking into these methods of assessment, statutory and agreement. But if everyone on the board recalls, we were in a bitter budget battle trying to get a budget across from both communities. And that seemed to take up quite a bit of time, and not an assessment methodology, but whether or not the towns could fund our assessment. What became clear for me in the timeline, which kind of sparked our curiosity, was when the town of Whitman moved past the article at town meeting. And that was sometime in May of 18. That's when some questions, and I actually had a conversation with Ms. Byers and Mr. Scriven and some of my central office staff to try to work out what the statutory method was. But the timeline post that is very accurate to us becoming aware of the different methodologies, how our method was being used, and then involving the state, not Mars, but the state with Christine Lynch and her office through the fall of 19 into where we are now.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Does anyone else have anything they would like to add? David?
I too have a timeline, and I was just wondering, Chair, if it would be all right if I can read it off and go over it with the rest of the committee.
Sure. About how long is it going to take?
Give me
we do
5
have a
minutes. I got it. 5 minutes. Yeah.
5 minutes. Okay, go ahead, David.
All right. So as Mr. Lamattina brought up before, McDuffie is kind of where I like to begin, but McDuffie didn't begin in 1993. It began in 1978. And this case went under different names, and it was amended several times up until 93 when ed reform was passed. However, what's interesting to note is the students and towns involved in this case that changed year after year. There was Whitman and Hanson students involved in the 93 McDuffie case. They were also involved in other cases. And when these cases kept getting amended and changed under different names, it was a different set of students because the previous set would age out. So there was students, people who still live in this town, that were involved in the McDuffie case prior to us regionalizing and still being a part of it after we signed our regional agreement in 1991. Talking about 1991 as well, there's individuals here who have signed that agreement that were a part of the school committee at that point in time, and our regional agreement was supposed to be amended every 5 years. So in 93, McDuffie was created. And then there was a DESI memo that went out in 93 as well, and it went out to all regional schools. It went out to everyone. And then flash forward a little bit later on, you have the 2007 DESI memo, which we already talked about. I don't need to mention anymore. We had a 2010 DESI memo that also went out. On top of that, DESI did a review of the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District in 2013-2014. They reported that town officials weren't being transparent about budget information. They were saying school committee members need to work more. The chair of the school committee needs to be aware of the budget situation and should be up to date on everything. They provided data that would have, if anyone looked at it when they did the review in 2013-2014, it would bring you to the statutory assessment, and it spoke about that in the document. It also spoke about in this 2013-2014 DESI review that there was supposed to be a joint finance committee formed in FY 2015 that was meant to discuss the regional assessment along with other budget issues to increase communication and transparency between town officials and the school district. On top of that, I found a document in 2014 from our former superintendent, Ms. Whitner, and it talks about her knowing about the McDuffie case. So she was well aware of the method and ed reform prior to 2016 when Mr. George sent the email to Ruth. So I don't believe that timeline's correct. In 2018, as we all know about the Mars meeting, that happened. And also in 2018, there was as we know, the amendment was passed unanimously by the school committee, and in the amended agreement that got passed over in the 2019 town meeting, that brings up the statutory law. It references it in the Mass General Law, and it was passed over. And then 2 months later, they amended that agreement that got passed over, and they removed it from that document for whatever reason. I received that from the town clerk today. So then there's also a district policy on the school website as well, referring to statutory and how we would go about it with a minimum level contribution. That was approved by the school committee. I don't know what year, but this whole entire, I guess what I'm getting at is this narrative that it was the former business manager and the former superintendent, they're the only ones responsible. This isn't true. It's not at all. I mean, this DESI document cited that town officials aren't being honest and forthcoming, and it was up to the chair of the school committee and other town officials to make sure they had the proper budget material, accurate information, and they gave us resources. They provided the chair, they provided the school committee, they provided both towns with accurate documents that would have brought you to the statutory method. But I don't know if anyone reviewed it or what happened there. So I guess my question too, and another finance committee, a finance committee member brought this up prior to this meeting. I think it was the last one. They said something about George Coffey, his daughter, being involved in the McDuffie case. And there was a claim made that the chair, Chair Kowalski, who was chair of the school committee in 93 during ed reform and 96 when the agreement should have been updated, that Mr. Kowalski told Mr. Coffey that his daughter would not receive a proper education unless he joined that court case. Now, I'm not saying that's true or not true, but I'm saying that was reported in a finance committee meeting. So I guess what I'm getting at is the chair of the school committee and the chair of the Selectmen, who used to be the chair of the school committee in the 90s when ed reform happened, both should have known about the statutory method. There's no excuse. And this is something that should have been brought up long before August of 2019 or March, whatever dates anyone wants to put on it, because I have a document right here from DESI that cites the school committee and town officials in 2013, 2014. And there's a lot, if you go back in the past, there was many opportunities. I'm counting 5 or 6 right now prior to 2018 that says that we should have known that, and they gave us the opportunity and the resources. So I don't understand why we waited till 2016, 2017 to update a regional agreement that should have been updated every 5 years since 91. And if it was updated in 96, we wouldn't even be talking about it today. And if we were using this method, our schools would have been in a better situation than they are now. We wouldn't be arguing about an override. There wouldn't be so much tension and Whitman-Hanson mentality. The statutory method should have been in our agreement since 93, and it wasn't, and look what it's done. And it's our elected officials' negligence that's led to this, whether they knew about it or not. It's either an unbelievable amount of ignorance over 27 years, or it's, I don't know, incompetence, but it's just really disappointing. So I believe this is an issue that's been going far back, at least to 91 when that regional agreement was signed, and the McDuffie case when Whitman-Hanson students were involved. So it's hard to say that the school committee or the school district had no clue. But I guess that's where I'm getting at. I just want to add that into there. And I thank you for your time, Chair.
Fine. Anyone else? Given that there has been yes, I'm sorry.
Could I just add one thing real quick?
Who's speaking? I'm sorry.
Fred Small.
Sure, Fred.
I just wanted, when Mr. Lamattina was laying out the timeline, and maybe it was my speakers, it got a little garbled, but I thought I heard him say that the email I received back said alternative method. It did not. It said statutory method. And that was in March of 19. That was the answer that I got back from Christine. So I just wanted to make sure that that came through okay. That's all, where I thought I heard something a little different.
Okay, thank you, Fred.
Chair Kowalski, I don't know
Yes.
if you can see me on the screen.
I can see you, Dawn. Looking good. What do you have to offer?
I just wanted to echo David's comments that really in the beginning, the regional agreement states it should be updated every 5 years. So I think the real consequence is the underfunding that has happened throughout all these years. I would like to add my experience in this process after I heard Mr. Lamattina at that Board of Selectmen meeting state the statutory method. It was at that time I had nomination papers to run for school committee. And I thought, what is this statutory method he's talking about? So I figured I needed to find out myself. After I was elected in June, did research, found Dennis Yarmouth, found Triton Regional. They had their budget booklets online. They had information about using minimum local contribution. I contacted the superintendent in June, met with him on July 17th, 2019, met with Christine. When I talked to other people about this and I brought these numbers forward asking, what is the statutory method? I was told this would tear the two towns apart. I was intimidated. People wanted to silence me. And I was lied to and told that we were using the statutory method. When I looked at this formula, I knew it wasn't true. And I knew that these numbers were exactly why these two towns were having budget issues. We weren't recognizing the statutory method. In fact, we learned this year, using the statutory method didn't tear these two towns apart. It actually brought them together in a sense that we just passed the largest budget increase the school has had in decades. And it showed that the voters would overwhelmingly support education in both of these towns. And I think the fact that if people knew about this and they didn't bring it forward in a truthful, honest way is what hurt the children in this district and the funding. And there is an entire generation of kids in Whitman-Hanson that suffered from this. Every year over the past 12, 15 years, especially since that Chapter 70 aid plateaued and the towns did not invest in their schools. Kids have had textbooks and teachers and services taken away from them year after year. So this did start by not reviewing the regional agreement 5 years after it was created. It would have been updated with the right formula. We would have had both towns contributing the way that they should have to their capacity, to their municipal revenue growth factors, to their combined effort yields, all of these terminology that is right there on the website. It has been year after year. Nobody has gone there to do the research. We can do better going forward, and I know we will.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Jeff now. Jeff, can you tell me specifically what we're going to be doing going forward that will allow this not to happen again?
Well, I do agree with the conversations about the review of the regional agreement. It should be reviewed every 5 years. I also think that an avenue is when anything comes in from finance regarding school funding or school budgets, that's shared with both town administrators so that they can disseminate it with their both boards of selectmen and their FinComs. David's recommendation or David's review of the 2014 recommendations from DESE also should be something we should talk about with the two communities. We've talked about this at length, and I know there are former school committee members that talked about having a joint meeting with FinComs when we start establishing the budget review cycle so that there's constant transparency and there's communication between the two. But I think I don't see necessarily a shift from the department to force communities into an assessment methodology. But now that we know about it, I think the way to safeguard is when issues come out from DESE regarding finance. It's shared from my office and central office to both communities. So there's checks and balances on each. If my administration, when I retire, hopefully in a lot of years, not that many, but not so soon, that there'll be a process by which the communities know the expectations from the state or from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and follow statute. But I think the clear piece of it is the fact that we never looked at that regional agreement, even though it was recommended or in the agreement that it would be reviewed every 5 years. So it's a learning piece there. You take information that is recommended by the department when they do their annual or 5-year or 6-year annual review and put that into practice.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, that just a second, Laura. Jeff, that 2014 email from Desi, or the 13, that report that David talks about, did
That's
that,
the
did that,
review.
pardon me?
Saying it's the 2013-2014 DESI review on Whitman-Hanson Regional School.
Fine. Where did that, who was that sent to?
It's usually sent to central office, I believe. It's a review of everything.
Do we know?
Finances,
Yeah.
it reviews program. I don't know when we're up again, but as a principal, I remember seeing that. We were interviewed as building leaders,
Right.
and then the review came out. And it talked about curriculum, it talked about special education. It did have I don't want to say chapter, but it had a section on funding. And I do recall reading that as far as open and honest communication between all three parties, school committee, both boards of selectmen, and throw in the finance committee, that dialogue had to continue. And even as I came onto the board, I do remember Mr. Trotta, who is retired from committee, always wanting to make sure that we had clear communications with the school committee, both boards of selectmen and finance committees.
Okay, well, I think that's something that needs to be redoubled, because apparently this 2013-14 review is something that I haven't seen. So I don't know how well it was shared with the towns. And I'm not accusing you of anything. I just,
No, and you know what, and
document
for reason, I think it was talked about bits and pieces at school committee meetings, but I think there should be more open dialogue, even with presentations at school committee meetings when we get things from the department.
okay, very good. Laura, you had your hand up.
Yeah, a couple of things. I appreciate all of the research that Mr. Lamattina and Mr. Forth have put into this. I know they're both passionate about this. And I think one of the things that I am finding very difficult to wrap my mind around is, where were the checks and balances here? We're talking about nearly a $55 million budget. Where was the district treasurer? Where were our auditors? Where were the checks and balances? How long could this have gone on where we potentially were getting the wrong assessments? We were having somebody check off the wrong boxes. To say that this is blowing my mind would be the understatement of the year. I cannot fathom a world in which we've got this amount of money and all of our checks and balances have failed. And I hear Mr. Szymaniak saying, you know, that we've got a new business manager and we're going to be more robust about sharing information, and that's all quite lovely, and I embrace that and think it's fantastic. But I have got to say that we have got to make sure that people are held accountable. And I get them, let's move forward and not dwell too much in the past, but let's have some accountability here for the people that should have been checking the work that you know, our prior business manager was doing. There is a reason why we've got auditors and all of these other people who are paid quite well, I want to remind you, to look at this work so that one rogue person checking off a wrong box isn't going to cause a decimation like it has. And I think the other piece that I'd like to also I'm hoping that we're going to work on is, while I can appreciate that the district was focused on addressing the immediate HR issue and handled it in the way that they thought was best and didn't tell the towns, and that's totally fine. I would have appreciated, as soon as it was known that there was an error, that an open line of dialogue had been opened with both towns, both boards of selectmen, say, hey guys, we've got a problem, and this is what we think we're going to need to do together. But that did not happen. So I'm hoping that that is a lesson that we have learned, and that dialogue is opened and continued in the future, because we are in this together, the three of us, the three groups together, trying to row in the same direction. Maybe sometimes we have somebody paddling off slightly to the left or slightly to the right, but I do believe trying to do what's in the best interest of both towns, which includes our children. And the only way we can do that is that if we're keeping an open and honest dialogue between all of these parties. So I appreciate the work everybody's done, and I too want to move forward, but I do think that we do need to look back and learn some lessons before we can close the chapter and move forward. And I hope that, I don't know, David, whether or not that DESE piece from 2013, 2014, is that just publicly available right now to everybody? I mean, if so, then I guess we can all look it up, but I would also recommend maybe just to make sure that everybody's looking at the same document, Chair Kowalski, perhaps you could get that and circulate it to everybody that's on this call, because it seems to me as though it may offer a blueprint for things that we could address.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Excellent response, Laura. Jeff, can you see that document is circulated to the participants?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay,
Not a
thank
problem.
you.
I have it. Actually, Michelle forwarded it to me right now, so I can get it out.
Okay, thank you very much. David,
we
you had
also-
something to say?
We also get that to the school committee?
Yes, Fred.
I've never seen that full report. I remember being interviewed, but I never remember getting a report.
It's on the DESE website,
Yeah,
Yes, it is. But I'll
under
forward it out.
district.
I'll make sure that everybody here gets a copy.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you, David. If you talk to George Coffey, tell him that I don't remember that conversation at all. Seriously, I don't.
Got you. We'll do, Carl. I haven't spoken with him personally.
George and I have had a long history. We've disagreed on a number of things. I was never a member of the Citizens for Limited Taxation. But on the other hand, George does a lot of good work too. But I think you should check with him and make sure that the story that you received about my telling him that his daughter wasn't going to get services is totally out of whack.
Yeah, unless you join the McDuffie case, is what I've heard.
Well,
And that's on a public
but
meeting.
there were a number of names that were on the McDuffie case were there just so that when that case went forward, that it wasn't only Brockton that was making the case, it was other towns too.
Right, there
Brockton,
was one Whitman name, and that was George Coffey's daughter.
okay, thought I remembered a different name, but that's okay.
No, there wasn't.
Chair Kowalski,
Yes.
if I may, I'd like to go on record. I did find Attorney Alan J. Rom online. He represented the co-plaintiffs in McDuffie, and I did speak with him directly and requested the names of all 14 towns and received that name. So I would just like to corroborate that I in fact have that email confirmation. So I don't want to misrepresent that David had just come up with that erroneously or whatnot.
Well, no, I know how he came up with it.
Okay.
That's not an issue. It was a remark made at a finance committee meeting, which was totally out of line. Is anyone? I saw. Yes, David.
I just wanted to add two things. One, during this meeting, I've heard the former business manager brought up quite a bit. I've heard the former superintendent brought up quite a bit, but I want to remind everyone, as I pointed out already, that before even either of them even worked here, this was an ongoing issue. You know, we weren't being properly assessed. We weren't going about the right legal process that we should have been. So to blame these two people, I think is just a narrative that's being pushed. I think you could say they're part of the issue, but I think this goes further back. I mean, this is an issue that previous business managers, previous superintendents have failed to do. And then another part, I'd like to talk about how that process was handled. Again, I want to thank Ms. Kemmett for her response. I really appreciate her words. And kind of to bounce off what she was saying about kind of keeping Whitman-Hanson Board of Selectmen up to date with everything, I want to remind everyone that the school committee themselves was not presented the settlement agreement, and the first person on the committee to actually see the settlement agreement was me when I was still a private citizen when I used the public records request. So this actually never went to the school committee when it was supposed to. So they weren't aware of what was signed, what agreement was brought forward until it was already a public record, and that was my own doing. So I just wanted to add those two things, and thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have anything they'd like to say? Because we're just about out of time. It's about time for Kenny to have his meeting, to chair his meeting. I think it's clear that what we need is to have to continue to have this kind of communication amongst the three boards. I don't know if we need meetings like this, but there needs to be better communication from the school department and the school committee to each one of the towns, so that we don't run into this situation in the future. And I'll certainly have to go back over my history in the 1980s and 90s and see where I ran astray at those times. And I will do that.
Chair Kowalski?
Yes.
Could I just add that I would hope, at least on the school committee side, that we come out with a clear action plan. As Ms. Kemmett had made mention of, would it be the responsibility of our district treasurer to be a watchdog? Would it be the responsibility of the auditing firm that audits our books by law every year? Should they have known and be a watchdog and have that safeguard in place? Also, when they do an audit, they audit our operational budget. They don't audit any of the revolving accounts. Do we know that everything within our own household is proper? And should we perhaps be talking about making sure that we have a complete and total audit to make sure that everything is in order?
Actually, Fred, that's a good point. I originally wasn't in favor of this general meeting because I wasn't sure of what it was going to accomplish, because I basically believed that the school committee's responsibility is to take care of its own house. And part of the communication issues between the school committee and the towns, well, they all begin with the school committee and the school administration. I think what needs to happen is that's where the energy has to begin. However, the different boards of selectmen and the finance committees in each town need to keep our ears open whenever you speak, and we need to pay attention to whatever you ask for and whatever you say and whatever you share. And what needs to be shared is everything. But I think that's the way we need to go. And unless I'm totally off base, somebody can correct me. Okay. Yes, Chris. Chris, I think I need to unmute.
Correct. Yep. Thanks. I just wanted to touch on the regional agreement committee and say that we always intended to reconvene. I can work with Chair Hayes and hopefully maybe get that on our next meeting's agenda, and we can set a date and get that process going.
Okay, that's great, because that was the third item on the agenda for today, was to make sure that we recommit ourselves to that committee. Anyone else have anything that they would like to add? Laura.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time, but to Fred's point, this has been a great dialogue. It's, we're working on forging these relationships going forward and trying to work together, but it's all for naught if we don't have an actual action plan. How are we going to prevent this from happening again in the future? So yes, let's get that regional agreement popping again, Chris. That's awesome. But to Fred's point, what are the steps? And I leave it to you guys really, but if you can kind of come back and tell us what you're going to do to make sure that the checks and balances are in place and that this doesn't happen again.
Okay, and you heard that, right, Jeff?
I did.
Okay, thank you. And I know Jeff did. I know he's going to carry through with that. Anybody else? Okay, motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved by Dan.
Okay,
Mr. Boyce.
all those in favor say aye.
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 We're out. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
everybody.
Carl.
Thank
Nice
you,
job.
everyone.
You guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Carl.